Good morning. Today is the 23rd day of Nisan, the 1st of May, and we're in Parshat Acharei. This is the parsha that describes the aftermath of the death of Aaron's two eldest sons, Nadav and Avihu. And in the aftermath, which was that they, as we explained it, were taken and didn't create a vessel for the tremendous excitement that they had when God's presence was revealed to all the people on the altar. And they went and they brought incense with foreign fire that was not allowed. And as a result of that, they died. And we talked about that a couple of weeks ago before Passover. And the aftermath is that God gives a vessel, one might say, of how to bring this incense in the proper way at the right time. And the right time is Yom Kippur, the 10th of the month of Tishrei, the 7th month. And this is something that happens with one man on one day in one place. These three things combine, Achat B'Shana, once a year. And the incense is the high point. Bringing of the incense into the Holy of Holies is the high point of the service of Yom Kippur. Another part of the service is a strange action we didn't have time to speak about, and I would like to spend a couple of minutes talking about it. The Sa'ir Lazazel, the scapegoat. And what exactly is a scapegoat? It's not a sacrifice, because it's never sacrificed. It doesn't have to necessarily be thrown off a cliff in order to die. It needs to be thrown off a cliff in order to not be seen again. And many years, the Jerusalem Talmud says that it actually ran off. It wasn't actually killed. It just ran off into the desert. That was also part of the Yom Kippur ritual. And what does that exactly represent, and why is it that we even do something like that? And it says specifically, and it's going to tie into our reading today, the fourth reading of Acharei. It says specifically that this is like a tribute to the Seirim. The Seirim, Seir means really a goat that is up to 3 years old. After 3 years they get long hair, shabby hair, so it's basically a shabby goat. And this Seir also means in Hebrew a demon, a shed. So it's a very strange thing that they go and they bring this out into the desert in order to bring it to some demon. We have to understand that the Torah talks to the sensibilities of the people that receive the Torah, so it has to speak in the language that they would understand. And their sensibilities, and unfortunately for many people today even, the way the people think about the evil inclination or the negative part of my personality is that it's not really me, it's really something out there, and it's attacking me. And because of this, you get all kinds of strange ideas like exorcism and so on, which places, as it were, the human mind separate from the negativity, and it places the negativity out there. I don't know if we've talked about this in the past, but one of the worst things that you can do psychologically is imagine that the world is out to get you, meaning that there are negative forces out there that you are helpless against, and you have to bring in them some kind of sacrifice to save yourself. That is a very victimhood type of mentality, where the world is against you and you're just trying to protect yourself, and that's a terrible way to live. A person has to feel that the world is entirely run by God, it is entirely good, and if there is any evil in the world, it's coming from me or other people. But again, the idea is that, first of all, we're responsible for it. And you've probably heard about this very interesting discussion about what exactly is evil. Is evil something in and of itself? Is it something that exists in and of itself? Or is it the absence of godliness? And the usual take in Judaism is that evil is the lack of godliness. It means that just as darkness can be understood as either something that exists in and of itself, or it can be understood as the lack of light, or heat can be understood, cold can be understood as something in and of itself, as it were, as if space is really cold, Or the way that the physical description today would be, which is cold is simply a lack of motion. It's a lack of heat. It's not something that exists in and of itself. So there is evil per se, but it's not evil in the sense that it exists somehow in the world and it's chasing us and running us down and trying to destroy our lives. That's not what evil is. Evil is lack of godliness, and when there is a lack of godliness in one's consciousness, they also feels that the world is a very strange place. But so with that in mind, how do we understand this today? God willing, we will be able to bring a scapegoat soon. What is a scapegoat? The scapegoat really is a psychological mechanism that we use. And we're saying that we're placing on the scapegoat all the feelings of self-aggrandizement that we received from the good that we've done. When a person does something good, they have a feeling of success, they have a feeling of accomplishment. Some of those feelings are needed in order to continue on, but a lot of them are self-aggrandizement. They turn into feelings of self-importance and ego. Those feelings need to be thrown out into the wilderness. They can't be left. In other words, I can't come before God asking for atonement before I've gotten rid of my high and mighty feeling of self. And most of that is the result, the direct result of the good that I've done, actually, the good things that I've done, and I've taken them to my credit. So the scapegoat is basically what carries out all those feelings of success and accomplishment that have contributed to my feelings of self-centeredness and egotism. And I toss them out into the wilderness saying, I don't need them. They belong to someone else, not to me. With that in mind, let's now go to today's reading, the fourth reading of Parshat Acharei. And in Leviticus 17:1, we read, God spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, to all the Israelite people, and say to them, this is what Hashem has commanded, what God has commanded. If anyone of the house of Israel slaughters an ox or sheep or goat in the camp, or does so outside the camp, and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, meaning to the tabernacle, to present it as an offering to God before God's tabernacle, blood guilt shall be imputed to that parting. Having shed blood, that person shall be cut off from among his people." In other words, you can't bring a sacrifice at home. And this is to prevent people from having a personal altar. And this was something that was actually very common because people want to sacrifice. In other words, they want to return something to God. And the way that they do this is that they take an ox or a sheep or a goat, something from their livestock, something from their possessions, and they say, we'll have a feast, but we don't want the feast to be a regular feast. We want it to be a feast of Thanksgiving. So let's take this animal and we'll slaughter it as if it's an offering to God. We'll bring parts of it as they did in the temple. We'll bring it on our personal altar in the backyard. This is basically like a holy barbecue. And the rest of it we'll eat, and all of it will be in thanksgiving to God. So he says you can't do this. You have to, if you want it to be a sacrifice to God, you have to bring it to God's house. You can't do it personally. You can't come and say, and this would be the equivalent. And this is a tricky subject. Somebody wants to give thanks to God, and instead of bringing his tribute to a house of God, to a synagogue, to the temple, when we have the temple, instead of bringing it to someone who sometimes we call, there are people who dedicate their lives to only learning Torah, we call them like a sacred vessel. Like they don't spend any of their time on making a living. When you bring such a person a tribute, or you bring it to the synagogue, you bring it to a temple, you bring it to a place the Jews congregate, and they dedicate that space to serving God, then that is a true tribute to God. But if you take that tribute and you come and you say, well, I'm going to use the money to buy a more beautiful candelabra, which in and of itself is a beautiful thought and it has great merit, but I can't say that this is how I give thanks to God. the thanks to God, my true thanks has to be shown by really dedicating it to a place of sacredness, and not just for my own use. Because if I do it for my own use, I'm always, in a sense, contributing to myself. It's the same idea as a scapegoat. As I was successful in something, but instead of using the success in order to thank God, I take the credit for it and I say, well, the first thing I deserve is, I made, $1 million this year. The first thing I deserve is a new car. And after that, we can start thinking about what God deserves. That type of thinking needs to be thrown out, because in a certain sense, what I'm saying is that there is success in the world without there being godliness. So here's another definition for what godliness means, and it's actually a definition that is true. It's just that different people have different definitions of success. If you have success, you've been visited by God in a sense. So if your idea of success is how much money you make, okay, I can't say that that's not godly, but it's not really what godliness is about. If the person would say, and I know a person like this, who says, I've had tremendous success in my life, I want to dedicate 80% of my earnings, instead of the usual 20%, I'm going to dedicate 80% of my earnings to godliness, you say, this man is very special. He may actually be onto something here, and the godliness that's touching him could be from a very high place. Usually when we talk about success, what we mean by success is spiritual success, meaning that a person is able to see that the true acts that have meaning in life are the Torah and the good deeds that a person is engaged in. These are eternal. These are really what it means to touch upon God's eternal nature. With that in mind, the Torah comes and says, and finishes this thought, this is in order that the Israelites, verse 5, that the Israelites may bring the sacrifices which they have been making in the open, that they may bring them before God, to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and offer them as sacrifices of well-being, shlamim. We've talked about this, peace offerings. They come from the word whole, from wholeness, well-being. These are the sacrifices that then the person shares with his friends. And by doing that, by showing that I've done this, I've brought the tribute to God's house. And this is exactly what we do. When we have a bar mitzvah, we do we cater at the shul. We have the simcha, we have the joy, the special occasion in the shul. When we have a wedding, it's the same thing. It should be something that is connected to the sacredness of the moment, and not just to something that is just to feed my friends, which is important in and of itself, because that's how you share the joy. But by sharing the joy and by making it something that is connected to a tribute to God, that way you ensure that you're not bringing these sacrifices as they were for your own ego, but rather you're getting rid of them, you're getting rid of the feeling of self-aggrandizement that usually comes with them, and you're ensuring that the joy is pure, that the joy is something that you will really continue to enjoy for years and won't become a burden on you because your ego is inflated, because your feelings of importance are inflated, and so on. And so everybody wants to have people gather in their home. Well, most people who are extroverts anyway. People who want to have clout, who have importance in the community, and so on. So don't just invite people over to enjoy your food. Invite them over for a class, and then bring the food. Invite them over for something that has to do with sacredness, with holiness. And then when you share the good fortune that God has given you, then that good fortune becomes something that truly lifts and elevates you spiritually too. Thanks for joining today. I hope to see you regularly from now on, starting tomorrow. Bye-bye.